On a cold spring morning in March of 2009, a gruesome discovery in Hertfordshire set in motion a police investigation that would uncover one of the most disturbing gangland murders in recent British history. What initially baffled authorities soon revealed itself to be the work of a notorious criminal known for his ability to make bodies disappear. Dubbed the Jigsaw Killer, his crimes were as chilling as they were methodical. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Today we look at the crimes of the Jigsaw Killer, his extensive gangland history, and investigate whether the authorities might have barely scratched the surface of the long list of his brutal crimes. On March 22nd of 2009, a farmer in Hertfordshire was tending to his livestock when he came across an abandoned green travel holdall on his property. Curious, he peered inside and found a blue plastic bag. When he realized the bag contained something resembling meat, or worse, he immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they cut open the blue plastic wrapping and made a horrifying discovery. A severed human left leg, complete with foot, wrapped in polythene and tape. With no other evidence at the scene, forensic specialists were called in to investigate, and their initial findings only deepened the mystery. No one on the missing persons list matched the description of the leg. The police widened their search, reaching out to other departments and stations across the country. Forensic examination confirmed that the leg belonged to a mixed heritage man who suffered from eczema. However, no DNA matches were found in the police database. Dr. Richard Shepherd, the forensic pathologist examining the remains, noted that the leg had not been severed by a surgeon, but rather by someone with knowledge of how to dissect around joints. This chilling detail suggested that the perpetrator was experienced in dismembering bodies. The police needed to identify the victim as soon as possible. If they could determine who the body part belonged to, they had a high chance of tracking down the killer. Just 1 week after the discovery of the severed leg, more body parts began to surface across Hertfordshire. On March 29th, dog walkers in Drovers Lane, Wheat Hampstead, discovered a severed arm, cut off at the wrist. On March 31st, a human head was found in a field near Asherby in Leicestershire. The victim's eyes, ears and nose had been removed, further complicating identification. A week later, another leg was discovered by a pest controller near a lay-by on the A10 between Buntingford and Puckeridge. And finally, on April 11th, a farmer spotted a suspicious green suitcase in a ditch in Collier's End, Hertfordshire. Recalling the previous holdall discovery, he refused to touch it and called the police. Inside, authorities found a decomposing torso with 2 stab wounds to the back. The victim's hands were never recovered, making identification even more difficult. The gruesome nature of the crime earned the victim the nickname the Jigsaw Man, while his unknown murderer became the Jigsaw Killer. The police launched Operation Abnet, a dedicated task force aimed at identifying the victim and catching the killer. Authorities released a public appeal urging people to come forward if they knew someone matching the victim's description who had recently gone missing. Shortly after, a man contacted police, stating that his brother, Geoffrey Howe, had not been answering his calls and matched the description given by officers. Howe, a kitchen salesman, had not been heard from by colleagues or friends. Police obtained his bank statements, which showed his last recorded transaction was on March 8th, when he purchased gin, tonic water, and washing up liquid. Since then, there had been no activity on his accounts. To avoid tipping off the killer, authorities kept their identification of Howe a secret. Their next move was to secure his home for forensic examination. It was there that they encountered 2 suspicious lodgers, a man named Stephen Marshall and his girlfriend, Sarah Bush. Marshall was no ordinary suspect. He was a well-known figure in the criminal underworld, a former bodybuilder, personal trainer, and nightclub doorman with strong ties to the notorious Addams family crime syndicate. Allegedly, Marshall had worked for the gang as an enforcer and corpse disposer. He frequently boasted about dismembering and making bodies vanish for the organization. His previous convictions included criminal damage, assault, battery, drug possession, and illegal firearm possession. In 2003, he had attacked his first wife, and in 1996, he was arrested on suspicion of murder, but never charged. The Addams family, also known as the Clerkenwell Crime Syndicate, or the A-Team, was one of London's most feared organised crime groups. By the 1980s and 1990s, they controlled much of the capital's drug trade. Their enforcers, like Marshall, were known to handle murders and dispose of bodies, often in Epping Forest, a notorious dumping ground for gangland victims. However, by the late 2000s, Marshall's criminal empire had crumbled. He had become a functioning addict and was completely broke. His connection to Jeffrey Howe came from a temporary arrangement. Howe had allowed Marshall and Bush to stay in his apartment, but they had overstayed their welcome by months and refused to leave. Jeffrey Howe had confided in a friend that his unwanted lodgers were eating his food, refusing to pay rent, and taking advantage of his kindness. He had reached his limit and wanted them gone. On the night of the murder, Marshall stabbed Howe twice while Bush was out, leaving him to bleed out. When Marshall returned later in the evening, he methodically dismembered Howe's body over a 12-hour period, cutting around the bones with skill. So what was the motive of this horrific crime? Marshall and Bush wanted complete control over Howe's life and assets. Within hours of his death, they began forging checks, withdrawing cash, and selling his belongings, including his car, which they auctioned off on eBay. On January 12th of 2010, the trial of Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush began at St Albans Crown Court. From the outset, both accused turned on each other. Marshall denied murder, claiming that Bush was responsible and that he only helped dispose of the body. He admitted to perverting the course of justice and preventing a coroner's inquest, lesser charges than murder. Bush, meanwhile, denied all charges. A forensic pathologist testified that the body had been expertly dismembered without cutting through bones, indicating that someone with anatomical knowledge had done the job. Given Marshall's past employment as a butcher and gang enforcer, the evidence pointed squarely at him. The court was shocked to hear of his past work for the Addams family, detailing how he had disposed of multiple bodies for the gang. He admitted to dumping corpses in Epping Forest, where many gangland victims were rumoured to have been buried over the years. The jury found Stephen Marshall guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years. Sarah Bush was found guilty of perverting the course of justice and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Detectives later attempted to question Marshall about his past confessions regarding disposing of other bodies. He refused to cooperate. Authorities believe that more victims may be buried in Epping Forest, but without Marshall's cooperation, they may never be found. Jeffrey Howe's murder was made all the more tragic by the kindness he had shown his killer. He had tried to help Marshall, only for his generosity to be repaid with betrayal and brutality. The case of the Jigsaw Killer remains one of Britain's most chilling gangland murders, and it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood film. This case leaves one critical question unanswered. How many more bodies remain undiscovered, hidden deep within the dark corners of Epping Forest? Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.